My advice to the hopeless: give St. Jude some work. He's the patron of hopeless causes. So if you're Catholic, ask St. Jude to help you. Otherwise, if you're hopeless, I would say, look at the world around you. Look at nature. Look at the tree that you thought was dead come back to life. I always say that we on Guam have the advantage of having the typhoons we have. So I understand that younger people may not have had the advantage of learning a lesson from typhoons, but the rest of us who have been through many bad typhoons, they teach us a lesson. Because you walk out when the typhoon's over and it's utter destruction, and yet new life comes back. So if you're hopeless, learn a lesson from Mother Nature. And if you're open to it, learn a lesson from Christ, who died and rose again. The dead can come back to life. And you may feel dead, but that's just today. Tomorrow could be a whole different experience. So I grew up in Sinahanya in the late 1960s when the houses were like 1 inch apart. And the kids played in the street, and we picked up people's garbage, and we made toys out of them. And I grew up when climbing trees was a big deal, and picking iba and putting them in soy sauce. That was a big thing. And I grew up in a generation where full-blown Chamorro wasn't spoken by my peers, but, we called each other Dofi, and Doknas. And I grew up in a village where everything was pretty much focused on either the commissioner's office, the fire station, the schools, and the church. And I happened to live basically next to all of these things. And I didn't have to actually get out of bed to listen to the priest at Mass, because my house was so close, I could listen to him, wake up to him sometimes. I was raised by mom, dad, grandmother, numerous aunties, a few uncles, and the village elders, because we went to church all the time, and all the mambiha, all the old ladies in church were also partly responsible for raising me, because if they didn't scold me themselves, they told my grandma and my other relatives what I was doing, and I'd get it when I get home. My grandmother had a sister who could barely speak English. As a matter of fact, she couldn't even pronounce my name correctly. I was Eric to her, and she was the family Tetsa. And every night at 8 o'clock, we turned off the TV and our knees hit the floor. Rita, whom we all called Nina, because she was the Matlina for half the family, she began the rosary and devotions. And so those devotions went on for a good half an hour, if not more. And all of those things captivated me, even though I didn't understand a word of what was being said. The sound of Chamorro, the sound of the hymns penetrated my soul and became a part of me. I think from an early age, I kind of realized I was given a personality that is akin to a sponge. I sort of have an ability to soak up whatever I'm placed in. As a matter of fact, I had a co-worker. We were both teaching in the same school, and he was from Minnesota. And I remember taking him after school to do errands or something. And we pulled up to a gas station because I needed to put some gas. The other car in the other lane was able to shout at me and say, "Hey." And I turned around, it was somebody I knew. He happened to be local, Chamorro. And so he and I were speaking English to each other. And then he was done and took off. And my stateside friend looked at me and said, "Do you realize what just happened?" I go, "No." He said, "You spoke English to that guy, but in a completely different accent from the way you speak English to me." I said, "Oh, I didn't know that." And I think, that's really served me well because when I was stationed up in Saipan for 3 years, that was a real soaking up. When I was assigned there in 1991, there were old ladies who were my parishioners who, if I had to speak English, looked at me with total blankness. They had absolutely no idea what I was saying. After Mass, I would sit down with the old ladies and they would bust out the pugwa, but more than pugwa. They busted out the pupulu and the ofot, and some of them the amaska. I was not used to chewing all of that, but to go into their world, to be that sponge and soak it all up, I asked them to make me a wad like they were chewing, and before you know it, I was really into it. Doing that, I listened. I listened to the way they spoke, and I didn't just listen to vocabulary. I listened to the ways they said things. A lady was saying how someone was giving her advice and she said, "Zahu okadzu." Literally what she was saying is she bit it, but what she was really meaning was she grabbed onto it. So I had to learn Chamorro in order to connect with them. I mean, that was my whole purpose as a priest, is to connect with these people, with whoever I am, and to try and connect with them on some of the deepest levels of human interaction. And so how can I do that if I don't speak their language, which was supposed to be my language? And so they became my teachers, but I had to be a sponge, and I soaked up as much as I could. Although I do know that life is not, and people are not so black and white, that even me, the sponge, can be a brick at times. So I would just say, be true to yourself, and not just at this moment, but every moment, which means you could be a different person in the next moment, but just be true to yourself. So if you are in need of absorbing, go out and absorb. And if you need to maintain your convictions firmly, then maintain them. I think the best advice I would give anyone who's trying to learn Chamorro is learn Chamorro the way you learned English. And how did you learn English? You learned English by being surrounded by English speakers. So as difficult and as challenging it might be today, try to find Chamorro speakers. I mean, if you have to crash Uncle and his 5 drinking buddies who are in the back of the house, but they're all speaking Chamorro. If you have to just kind of creep and just, be on the side and not be seen, in order for you to listen to that, do it. That's the best way to learn language, is immersion with people who already speak the language. And I didn't have to tell people to speak Chamorro to me, because in the case of Saipan, that was the only language they knew. They had to speak to me in Chamorro. And if I didn't understand it, that was my problem. Because language belongs to a community that speaks it. And that's the best way to learn it. If you're ashamed or if you're easily embarrassed when you make mistakes, when you're mamahalo, it goes back to what I said about learning Chamorro the same way you learned English. When you first started to say mama, dada, but you had really bad grammar. People were constantly correcting you. It's not ice cream, it's ice cream, whatever it was that you were messing up. But you didn't have the self-consciousness and the embarrassment of a 1-year-old. It wasn't an issue. So it's the same thing with Chamorro. You have to just forget that self-consciousness. You have to put that pride away. And you have to make a ton of mistakes. And that's also how I learned. I remember proclaiming the gospel one day in Malesso. And I said, tentago, because I had never learned the word. I just read it, and I knew from the English gospel that it meant servant or someone you send on an errand. And after the mass, this Malesso lady came up to me and said, Pali, ahiti tentago na tentago. Oh, tentago. Okay, si Diyos Masi. You can be darn sure that from that day forward, I never said tentago again. And so sometimes the embarrassment of making mistakes is actually great. It's actually what you need to go through in order to learn. Because if you do have that pride, you won't make the same mistake twice. I wanted to be an altar boy before I received First Communion. And I would pester Sister Optada all the time. Can I join? Can I join? She goes, you haven't made First Holy Communion yet. So as soon as I made First Holy Communion, I think I was a server the next day. And so I wanted to be a priest since as early as then. So I like to tell people that I was raised in a convent, but not the Mercy Sisters or the Notre Dame Sisters. I was raised in the Kitaan convent. Kitaan is the family name for my extremely small family because it was made up of all women except for one man, and the one man never got married. But the Kitaans of Sinahanya are these old women who were super, super religious. Even Nina, our family Tetsa, who was also our family cook, I'll remember this day to the day I die. I think I was 4 or 5 years old. And she said, Eric, what you want, eat. And I said, oh, I'll have fried rice, eggs, and bacon. And she said, Tisinya bacon. It was a Friday in Lent. But I was 4 years old. I was excused from abstinence. I was too young to abstain. But no, you had to abstain even if I were 2 years old. She probably wouldn't have given me any meat. So these older ladies were super Catholic, and so I just grew up with it. I absorbed it. I didn't even really understand it because so much of it was in Chamorro. But somehow, just something in the sound of their voices singing, something in their facial expressions when they prayed, I just could look at Nina when she was praying. And I can't put words to it, but just something profound hit me. I just felt it. I didn't think these words at the time, but I'll put words to them now. I just looked at them and I said, wow, that's cool. I like it. This means something. And, my mom and dad are also Catholic, but nowhere near as Catholic as Grandma and those older aunts who raised me. Let's just say that going to Mom and Dad's house was maybe 10 degrees cooler. In the Chamorro and Catholic house here with Grandma, there was life, there was flavor, there was color, there was sound, there was taste. It was warmer, it was all-embracing, it was full of life. It penetrated the soul. So for me, religion, that was just like breathing. It was just part of my life. When I was a teenager, I didn't lose my faith, but I lost my focus. And in those years, I was totally absorbed into politics. When I was going to school at Bishop Baumgartner, I just heard that the school was looking for candidates for the Guam Youth Congress and found myself down at the legislature representing Bishop Baumgartner in the Guam Youth Congress. And I loved it because it was social. You got to hang around people your age, and they were interesting and had all kinds of ideas, and we had meetings, and it was the first time I got my feet wet because, you have to get up and speak in front of all these people. So my years in politics, which were my high school years, that was a great world education into human nature, into public speaking, communication, so many things that I couldn't have learned just in the seminary, and I couldn't have learned just from books. But it did mean that I became a Christmas and Easter Catholic. I had been an altar boy all my life, and once I got involved in politics, and not just Guam Youth Congress, but because I was hanging out at the legislature all the time, so I stopped serving Mass. But I think it was a necessary phase for me to go through, where I learned to connect with people from all shades of life, Catholic and non-Catholic, non-practicing Catholic. And then I remember January of 1980, I was due to graduate. Just the thought hit me. Kiddo, you got 5 months and then you're on your own. What are you going to do with your life? And I just visualized myself on the top of a mountain, and in front of me, a vast plain. And I could go this way or that way or this way or that way. And if you looked at my graduating yearbook, it's all made out to the future governor of Guam, to the future congressman for Guam. And yet, as I said, be true to yourself. When I looked from the top of that mountain on this vast plain, and all the choices in life were available to me, I could do whatever I wanted. I said to myself, what do I really want to do? And I couldn't deny it. The voice came back saying, priesthood. And I said, you, priest? You've been away from the church for so long now? I said, yeah, I know, but the voice is still there. That was another good thing, is that if I didn't become a priest, I probably would have ended up being a politician. And I had already tried it. I kind of said to myself after, reaching the pinnacle of that, it was like, is that all there is to it? And I said, there's got to be more. And that more was the priesthood. I met my first pope when I was 10 years old. So I guess the family got together, and before my grandmother got too old that she couldn't do it, they all chipped in and got her and me tickets to join this pilgrimage. So long story short, we end up in Rome, 1972, and we have a papal audience. There was a huge hall built next to St. Peter's Basilica. And the Guam group, our group, got in, and we were placed about halfway from the front. But then there was an Italian TV crew. I don't know how they found out, but they found out we were from Guam. I guess they said to themselves, wow, we never get anyone from Guam. You guys can't be stuck back here. And they moved us up. We were only 10 benches or 10 rows from the Pope. So in comes Paul VI. He comes down to our side, and he starts shaking hands of the people up till row 10, which was my row. And then as soon as he was done with row 10 on our side, he moved across the aisle to row 10 on the other side and worked his way back up to his chair. So the Guam pilgrims all got a chance to shake the hand or kiss the hand of Paul VI in 1972, and I was one of them. The next pope I met was John Paul II. And of course, he came to Guam. The night he came in, the Pope came in to the cathedral, and there's a picture of me actually. In that photo, you can see me because I'm standing on top of the pew. Other younger people also were climbing on top of each other to stick their hands out, and sure enough, the Pope grabbed mine. The next day was the Papal Mass, where his statue is now in the middle of the street. And I was a chauffeur. So I was told, okay, you take so-and-so to the airport at such and such a time. And when I got up there to the airport, I thought I was just going to drop this VIP and be on my merry way. Well, when I got up there, security was directing me onto the tarmac. And then somebody said, okay, all you drivers line up. Lo and behold, the Pope's limousine comes onto the tarmac. The limousine stops and out comes the Pope, and the Pope shakes the hands of every driver that was lined up. So I got to kiss Pope John Paul II's hands twice in my life. So that many years later, in the year 2000, when I was a delegate to a certain meeting in Rome, all these other delegates were racing, elbowing each other, leaping over each other to get to the front seats so that they could be close enough to touch Pope John Paul II. And I was the last guy in the line. And people were like, Eric, don't you want to run up there and, get as close as you can? I said, I've already touched this hand 2 times on Guam. The first time I came across the word Inafa Maulik was on top of the confessional at the cathedral in the 1970s when they decided to put the Chamorro equivalent of confessional. One door said reconciliation room, and the other door said Sagan Inafa Maulik. And I learned that Inafa Maulik means to make something good, and it's the work of 2 or more people. It's mutual. Fa means to make. Maulik means good. A means mutually. Fa Maulik. Mutually making something good. The first meaning, and the only meaning really for a long time that I gave to Afa Maulik or Inafa Maulik was to repair something that's broken. So 2 people who are fighting and they make peace, Umafa Maulikidos. The 2 repaired their broken relationship. The 2 reconcile. And in confession, we reconcile with God. Now, Inafa Maulik has become an umbrella term. Almost anything good under the sun fits underneath the umbrella. I hold on more to what I learned was reconciliation, repairing something that's broken. What brings me joy? Being asked these questions. These questions are what's really on our minds, and it's so much nicer to talk about these things other than, well, wasn't the traffic really bad today? This is the kind of stuff that more of us should be talking about and support each other, learn from each other. And even if we don't have anything to say because the problem is so complicated maybe or weighty that we just don't know what to say, we don't have any piece of advice to give, as long as we listen and then end with a hug and just say, hey, I may not have a solution for you, but I'm with you. To the young people who may be having a very difficult time figuring out life and what they want to do, if you are right now in a very painful moment of your life and have been maybe for quite a while, that's not the end of your story. It's part of your story, but it's not the full story of your life. You have a lot to live for. And you can make some decisions in your life that can change the story of your life for the better. So don't think that the past and the present is all there is. There is a future, and much of it is in your hands. And figure out what you're good at. And if you're not sure about that, maybe point you in the direction, well, try this and try that. And if you try it and it's not something you're good at, well, at least you know that. And don't try it again and try the next one. And, you'll find the hat that fits best. But you got to try maybe 10 or 20 different hats until you find the one that fits you the best. And then when you find what you're good at, go in that direction, because you're meant to contribute to this world. Find someone good to talk to, someone who really wants the best for you and can give you honest advice. Because I talk to people from all walks of life. I talk to people in their moments of glory, and I talk to people in their moments of darkness. And there are people who really are lost. And I feel for them. I really feel for them. I haven't been in that situation since I answered the call to become a friar and then a priest. And so I just can't imagine myself being anything else or doing anything else. And I've had that feeling since 1981. I still believe that God has a reason, and we will find out that reason. And when we do, we're going to say, okay, got it.